I hate the data mining process. The second the people start going through the files of a game to find out stuff about the in-game lore and story, the line between what can be considered canon and what is invalid becomes super blurry. Especially because during the interview that I had with Tarsier Studios before, they said that the data mining process was something they didn't intend for others to do. So basically, using the data mined information to speculate on the story in the game is both underhanded and uncreative. So with that out of the way, and perhaps with some enemies comfortably made, let's talk about the stuff that happened in the Hideaway. This one is specifically going to talk about the possibilities indicated by the engine room and the surrounding environments and objects. It's time for some talk about the gnomes. So let's get some obvious stuff out of the way. Everyone's going to point to the scene where the gnomes are sitting around the furnace and have different shadows. Specifically the shadows that would match with the character models of the children. The bread child and the flashlight girl specifically seem to be indicated by the shadows over and over and over again. So the immediate reaction from the community seems to be to jump to the conclusion that the gnomes are the children somehow. Well, let's discuss how that might be the case, if it is the case. We can see that the gnomes are smaller stature than the children by at least half if you don't include the pointy hat. They have sort of grayish, papery looking skin and bulbous bodies that seem to be disproportionate and lacking basic anatomical connections. They wear a tall pointy hat that looks like it might be made of some kind of rolled up paper, maybe? They have weird flat feet and kind of normalish hands, and we don't see under their hats ever. So, how could a child be made into a gnome? Well, the process probably starts off with the janitor wrapping them in what initially looks like paper, but then later also kind of looks like fabric or cheesecloth. Inconsistencies. He hangs the wrapped child bound on the outside with rope on a conveyor of hooks that we watch being taken through several different areas. Some of them go to the kitchen area that are dropped in the pantry, like the one that Six rides on. We don't really see any other thing being wrapped up like the children are, and by virtue of Chapter 2 of The Secrets starting with the runaway kid ripping himself out of one such wrapping, we know that at least some of those such wrapped parcels must be children, despite their size being far, far larger than that child's height. It's impossible to make the assertion that all of the wrapped parcels are children, but it is at least plausible on account that we see no other things being wrapped. So, the parcels are children. However, we see these bundles all over the place in the games, be they wrapped up in the suspended rowboat in the first DLC, or piled up in the pantry, or hanging from hooks here and there. They get around the maw somehow, but it's reasonable to assume that not all of those packages have been undecayed. The ones in the first chapter of The Secrets, in the boat for instance, must have been decayed and rotted by then. The runaway kid definitely hopped around parcels full of bones of dead children there. Grim. But it's possible that the wrapped up children may go through some process, intentional or not, and become the gnomes. This is kind of a weak premise, but I'm gonna try, just for the sake of argument. Look at the way that the pointy hats of the gnomes look like a dry, thin, papery substance. I'm almost inclined to think that it might be like a dried skin or something, but it may also be the paper in which the kids are wrapped by friendly neighborhood Roger. Wrapped up tightly, the child would normally die and decompose, and in a place like the maw, where everything is generally wet and humid thanks to being underwater, the body would stay juicy and just grossly decompose with all of the nasty bacteria and things that would grow inside. However, in places of high heat and low humidity, bodies may instead mummify, with all of their moisture being sapped from them into the hot, dry air. This would leave a sort of shriveled and arid corpse, the skin remaining far longer than the internal organs and the like. Well, where in the maw fits the hot and dry description? Well, the furnaces. The engine rooms where the huge fires are seem to produce nauseating amounts of heat that power the maw's locomotion. The air near any of those furnaces would probably make a perfect environment for the drying out of a corpse. This leads to the possibility that some of the bodies that are wrapped up by the janitor are carted through the areas that have the heat and dryness that would be necessary for desiccation of the body. However, just mummifying a child would not restore it to some semblance of sort of semi-intelligent life. Of course, the mummification process might theoretically imply that the change in the shape and size of the child's body down to being where the gnome's body is would make some kind of sense. Again, it's a stretch, but it's what everyone really wants to hear right now. But we've seen instances of literal supernatural force or spirit or something contained within an item in this game. The statuettes of the lady that Six can break if she comes across them, which release some kind of ghostly wisp. It stands to reason that in this universe there's the possibility of sort of infusing or containing something inanimate with some kind of energy to be stored inside. Suppose then that the spirits of the children that would normally leave their bodies upon death are prevented from doing so by the supernatural nature of the way that they're being transformed. The body desiccates and deforms, becoming this leathery, papery, misshapen, shrunken form of the gnome, and the spirit of the child is somehow forced to stay in its dry prison. Well, this would explain the intelligence differences between the gnomes and the children. We see at least one NPC child, the girl in the dress, with the flashlight at the beginning of the DLC, exhibit reasonably intelligent behavior in the escape attempt at the beginning of the Secrets of the Maw. All we see the gnomes doing, however, is hiding, carrying coal into a furnace, scribbling with crayons and coal. A sort of fear-based response, a repetitive mindless task, and a behavior that is almost quintessentially a symptom of insanity. The spirit of the child, perhaps retaining some of its consciousness, is trapped inside a body that was once its own, but has now been horribly transfigured. So sort of unable to bear looking at itself in any kind of reflections, it hides its own face with that hat, and finds solace in the hidden faces of others like it, opting for that hat that allows it to still see where it's going and things, but not see the others or itself. It is of course slowly driven completely insane by its new twisted existence, losing its own memories and personality, and leaving only the behaviors that we see back behind. Fear, obsession, insanity. It's all speculation at best, of course. No solid proof exists that the gnomes are actually what becomes of the children. But Vincent, the shadows from the thing, they prove it. The gnomes are the kids, whatever. Let me offer an explanation that would include the shadows and give a result where your immediate assumption with no analysis or thought is not the end result. Look at the shovels in the Hideaway. They are made for a creature 4 times bigger than the runaway kid at least. RK here is at least twice, possibly 3 times bigger than the gnomes. No reasonable person would think for even a second that the shovels in the engine room were there for the gnomes to use, and yet we see the gnomes being the ones that load the coal into the mouth of the fire-shaped furnace, one piece at a time. The more of them we get in the main room, the better the furnace burns because they can carry the coal more quickly when there are more of them. The ramp built up to the mouth of the furnace is also very slipshod and improvised at best, so we absolutely know that this place was not designed with the gnomes in mind. The gnomes were not the intended caretakers of this furnace. So why do the gnomes feed the furnace? Well, look at the other instance that we see gnomes concerned with a furnace, at the end bit where they all sit peacefully without fear or trepidation, where they take no notice of the player at all and just bask in the warmth and light of the fire from this furnace. This is the only time where we see the shadows of the gnomes being cast as anything but the shadow of the gnome and their pointy hat and weird body. So if the gnomes were supposed to be children all along and their shadows were supposed to be the tip-off for it, then why is this the only place where this effect occurs? Well, it must be because flashlights don't produce the same kind of light as fire, so when you shine the flashlight on the gnome, you get the gnome pointy hat thing. These shadows have to be produced by firelight. Oh, okay, well then what about the main furnace into which they eternally feed the coal? No child-shaped shadows there. Or what about when Six uses her lighter near a gnome? No child-shaped shadow there either. So what is it about this room that is different? I propose that the gnomes are actually hearth spirits. The sort of household spirit like a brownie or a domovoy that tends to the fires of a house in this universe maybe. In a normal situation, a house might have one or two of these spirits that like tend to the coals in the stove so long as you leave them out a gift of some sort. It's the gnome's duty right now to make sure that the furnace continues to burn on the maw, which would sort of parallel the domestic duty of a house spirit in a normal situation. I think it's plausible that the world of Little Nightmares may have such creatures as like a household spirit of some sort, because of how heavily it borrows from and is influenced by the mythology of various cultures. So, okay, the gnomes are the spirit of a hearth that revere a well-burning and warm hearth as a state of perfection, maybe. But then, why the shadows of the kids? Follow me, trust me. We previously stated that the possibility of having some kind of energy contained in an object is a necessity based on these statues. We also know that there must be instances of the death of a child in this game, based on, if nothing else, the arm hanging out of the submerged bag in the depths, not to mention all of the times that you as a player character die. What if the maw itself is a huge vessel like the statues inside, and thus the spirits of the dead children are kept inside it? Where can they go to find any rest? Well, we see the pictures drawn that may be depicting gnomes and children hanging out together. This can be evidence that gnomes are okay with children, since we know that the gnomes are the ones drawing the pictures. But every time that Six or RK gets near a gnome, the gnome flees in terror. Well, why is that? Could it be that the pictures the gnomes draw are not pictures of the children, but rather pictures of the spirits of those children who are dead? Especially because it's highly unlikely that any child would be in a place where gnomes and children could interact freely, thanks to people like the janitor and the security system eyeballs. It makes sense that a physical child would actually be a rare occurrence for most gnomes. But a child's spirit? I make the supposition that the gnomes are in fact not the children, but instead choose to become connected or bonded with the spirits of the dead children, possibly for compassion or companionship or some other unknown reason that only they know. That's why the gnomes are cool with Six and RK only after they manage to grab one of the gnomes. At that point, the gnome can feel the spirit inside of them and recognizes it as being that same kind of spirit as the friendly child spirits that they hang out with already. So, the hearth spirits that live on the maw live by the fires. Whatever used to use the shovels to scoop coal into the furnaces no longer does so, which forced the gnomes to start doing it on their own for fear of the loss of their central furnace, where perhaps the purest fire must be. That furnace may well actually be the origin point of the gnomes on the maw. Perhaps they came from that first fire. It's their most revered and sacred place, which you can tell by the fact that everyone inside is so peaceful and serene, and by the fact that they hide the entrance to it, even from where no one else would be. Why would you bother hiding the entrance to something that only you guys know about? Well, maybe it's some sort of ritual. It is only by the light of this furnace, which is the most important to them, that we, the players, can see their shared connections with the spirits of the children that they have bound by means of the child's spirit. That's the shadow we see. That's why this fire, the one that the hearth spirit gnomes hold as the most important, is the only light by which these shadows are revealed. That's why gnomes run away from you until you catch them. That's why they draw pictures of gnomes and children together, despite being in a place where almost certainly no living child has come before. The gnomes are companions of the ghosts of dead children who cannot escape the maw. So there you have it, an obvious observation with two explanations. I think it's too specific of an instance to be proof that the gnomes actually are the kids, because it does nothing to explain why we only see those shadows in this specific place. Tarzer's definitely got more up their sleeve than they want to leave us to believe. No, the simplest explanation in this case is the one that I feel to actually be the least true. Now watch, in like 3 months or something, Tarzer's gonna release something that will likely definitively prove my postulation completely wrong, and then for the next year afterwards I'll get comments saying, "Lol, you're wrong, haha, loser." I'm really looking forward to when that happens. Lord knows it's already happened once before in this series of theories. Series of theories. Say that 10 times fast. Series of theories, series of theories, series of theories, series of... Well, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope I haven't made too many enemies today. If you enjoyed the theories and enjoy some of the other things that I do as well, you might hop down to the Patreon link that is there and maybe toss some support my direction that way. It would help me be able to eat and live, which are two things that are necessary for me to continue making theories. I'm sorry this one took so long for me to make. It just, every time I started writing more of the script, I kind of just got like, everyone's just gonna be like, no, you're wrong or whatever, and it got really discouraging. But I did it, so I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.